And I'm an asshole, and that's okay. I piss people off, and it makes my day. It's John again. With John sees the world, or does John see the world? Well, tonight I got a bit of sad news. I found out about the death of a friend of mine about 3 weeks ago. Died from cancer. Started out as prostate and then metastasized into different parts of his body. He was 2 years younger than I am. In case any of you viewers out there are wondering, I'm 67 years old, and I'm still not tamed. Okay. Now, as for my friend Danny Schmidt, it was a long and complicated relationship once we became young men. I had known Danny since he was 7 years old, and I was 9. And I remember my Aunt Benita on my mom's side was the one who introduced us. You know, John is Danny, Danny is John. And Danny was sort of moving around kind of strangely and what at the time. And I asked him, "Why do you move so weird?" And he told me he had stitches in his ass. He had sat down on a piece of glass, unfortunately, and it had cut his butt, and he had to have stitches. Of course, that was embarrassing to him, but that was my first experience of Danny. Over the years, my father being in the military, we moved from base to base. Over the years, Danny and I had always kept in contact. When we were stationed at Selfridge Air Force Base just outside of Detroit, you know, our family would go up to Saginaw every chance we got, every weekend we got a chance. And Danny and I would reconnect. This was like a 2 year period in the early to mid 60s, I suppose. And then we went to Texas, and for 5 years we were out of Michigan. And every once in a while we get a chance to go up to Michigan and drive up there, and my father would drive us in his car. 1965 Impala two-door Super Sport. Beautiful car. Incredible car. I still remember the damn thing and the smell, the feel. But that's not the point. The point is, even during those brief trips, I would be allowed to hang out with Danny, and our friendship and our brotherhood would grow and continue. Well, after Texas, we were assigned to Wartsmith Air Force Base, Michigan, and we're there for about 3.5, 4 years. Yeah, more like 3.5. I remember starting my freshman year in high school there and finishing there as a junior and then moving on. And every weekend and every opportunity we got, we went home to Saginaw, Michigan, which is only 100 miles south of us. And Danny and I would connect. And there were times when, in the summer or such, Danny's mother and father would send him up to Oscoda, Michigan. And he and I would, and he would stay with us. And he and I would, be together and have fun and everything, like most young boys do, exploring the woods and looking for wild animals and just generally being guys. And there were times when we would go down to Saginaw when I'd be allowed to stay at Danny's house overnight or over several nights because, they trusted me with their family, and Danny and I were close buds. We were close friends. We were brothers. And then we were moved to Incirlik, Turkey. That was 1975, summer of 75. Well, let me get a drink here. And of course, we were separated from our immediate families, and I was separated from my friends. I graduated high school in Turkey, came home before the rest of the family in early 88. No, I'm sorry, early 77. Jeez, what am I talking about? And when I did come home, I remember there was still snow on the ground. I think it was February. Yeah, I think it was February that I came home. Still snow on the ground. My grandmother was in the hospital, and I would make, the trip by foot to go see her in the hospital when nobody, none of the other grandkids were. And I remember my biggest wish, biggest accomplishment that I wanted to do when I got home to the States. I ate 3 Big Mac hamburgers. You have to understand, I lived in Turkey for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and didn't have one McDonald's hamburger or French fries the whole time we were there. But the best part about it was that Danny and I were able to get back together. And it still had that same love of brotherhood for each other, regardless of all the years that had passed when we weren't together. We were still loyal to one another, caring for one another, in need of one another's acceptance of what we did. And then Danny introduced me to the young lady who would be my future wife. I'm not going to name her. That's not fair to her. It wouldn't be. Needless to say, her and I got it on, and we were close for a while, and then we broke up. And then my folks and the rest of the family came home from Turkey, and I went south to Michigan with them, or to Texas with them, to start work and go to college and all that other good stuff. Over the years, I never forgot that young lady that Danny had introduced me to. But as it turned out, he married her instead. And it was sort of rocky, I guess, they're being the first marriage for both of them, and neither one of them having any experience, and Danny being Danny, and her being her. And it didn't work out too well. And when next I saw them both, it must have been 1983. It was the summer of 1983. And I had just joined the Navy back in January of that year. Had just finished BEE, Basic Electricity and Electronics School in Orlando, Florida. And I was on my way to my A school in North Chicago at the naval base there. And I stopped in and I visited with them, and of course I still had these, wow, she's still gorgeous and all that, but she's my buddy's wife at that time. Well, needless to say that I went on to my A school, joined and, kept going, and did the best I could, and ended up in the fleet. And then I found out she divorced Danny. And there were some things that happened that need not be talked about. Doesn't make any sense. Danny's gone now. And when I went back home to Saginaw, Michigan, her and I sort of got together. And one thing led to another, and we became married after she had divorced. And Danny was understandably unhappy with that. Okay? But the thing is, despite what everybody told me and everything that went on and whatever, he had no animosity toward her. He had no animosity toward me. He just didn't like the situation. In other words, we were brothers, no matter what. Well, needless to say, her and I, we were married and it lasted about 3.5 years and didn't work out. I mean, you're home 1 month out of every year. How can you expect a marriage to work out? And you're asking, well, why 1 month out of every year? Well, I was in the Navy, and I wasn't going to have her living in a city of Norfolk, Virginia, without knowing anybody. At least back home in San Antonio, she knew her mother, she knew her uncles and aunts, she knew my parents and our relatives. Well, some years later, her and I got back together again and decided to try it again. Seeing as when we were married, I was never home, and we lived together for 3 years, and once again, it just didn't work out. And she decided to go home to Michigan. I've never blamed her for that. That's what she wanted. That's what her family wanted. That's the way it is. She ended up back with Danny, who had changed considerably as a person. And they spent the next 30 years together, which I'm glad they did. I'm glad they had each other. I really am. I mean, me, I don't want, to reestablish that relationship. I'm happy being a single, free flying, do whatever I want type of guy. But Danny, I found out 3 weeks ago, had passed away from cancer. And I was talking to my cousin, and she was friends with him and with my ex-wife. And Danny's ex-wife, who was currently his wife, if you could follow the whole genre thing, the whole thing there. And she said, Danny never spoke ill of me. Never cursed me, never said, well, what the hell was he thinking, or any of that. And honestly, I've never spoken ill of Danny. I've always loved him. He was always my brother. And my one regret is that we did not at any time over those 30 years speak to each other. Because each of us had a preconceived idea of hatred from the other. I'm always going to regret that. This is the second brother I've lost in a year and a half. Last year I lost Mick, and this year I lost Danny. But I hope you'll forgive me for not being funny on once again. I know. Last time I promised you the next one would be funny. I can't. I couldn't do it. This is something that just happened today that I just happened to walk into. And I had to tell you about it. But anyways, to my brother Danny, who is gone now, I wish only Valhalla and whatever is good. Amen, brother.